girl as though he had never seen one before. Harry started to laugh. The sound seemed to jog Ron back to his senses. "She's a failure," he said hoarsely to Harry. "Of course she isn't," said Hermione, trying. "I don't see anyone else gaping at her like an idiot." But she wasn't entirely right about that. As the girl crossed the hall, many boys' heads turned, and some of them seemed to have become temporarily speechless, just like Ron. "Oh, that's not her normal girl," said Ron, leaning sideways so he could keep a clear view of her. "They don't make them like that at Hogwarts." "They make them okay at Hogwarts," said Harry without thinking. Cho happened to be sitting only a few paces away from the girl with the silvery hair. "Well, you both put your eyes back in," said Hermione briskly. "You'll be able to see who's just arrived." She was pointing up at the staff table. The two remaining empty seats had just been filled. Ludo Bagman was now sitting on Professor Karkaroff's other side, while Mr. Crouch,
Hey, Fire, how you doing?
"What are they doing?"
Hope you're doing good.
said Harry in surprise. "They organized the Triwizard Tournament, didn't they?" said Hermione. "I suppose they wanted to be here to see it start." When the house arrived, they noticed a number of unfamiliar faces soon. Ron examined an odd sort of pale blancmange closely, then moved it carefully a few inches to his right, so that it would be clearly visible from the Ravenclaw table. The girl
That wasn't too bad.
appeared to have eaten enough, however.
Decided to try going live on just my phone.
Once the golden plates had been wiped clean, Dumbledore stood up again. A pleasant sort of tension seemed to fill the hall now. Harry felt a
Wish
slight
my lighting ain't
excitement,
too good.
wondering what was coming. Several seats down from them, Fred and George were leaning forward, staring at Dumbledore with great concentration.
In front of the writing table, and, as usual, visibly rejected such an unsteady seat. Only then did she acknowledge Egwene's presence with the barest dip of her head. "We need to speak of the sea folk, Mother," she said, in a tone a bit firm to be directed at the Amerlin's seat. Not until Egwene's heart sank down from her throat did she realize she had been afraid that Lelaine already knew what Lord Bryn had told her, or even the meeting he was arranging. The next instant, her heart leaped back again.
Right?
The sea folk? Surely the Hall could not have learned of the insane bargain Nynaeve and Lelaine had made.
But
She could not imagine what
I
had led
can't
them
keep
into
an
such a
actual eye on
disaster,
it.
or how she was to deal with it. Her stomach roiling, she took her place behind the table without revealing anything of what she felt. And that fool chair leg folded, nearly dropping her onto the carpets before she could jerk it straight again. She hoped her cheeks were not coloring. The sea folk in Camelin or in Kyrian? Yes, that sounded suitably calm and collected. Kyrian! Romanda's high voice rang like sudden chimes. Definitely Kyrian. Her entry made Lelaine seem almost diffident, the force of her personality abruptly filling the tent. There were no warm smiles in Romanda. Handsome as her face was, it did not seem made for
my
them.
light.
Theodrin followed her in, and
There we
Romanda
go.
swung her cloak off with a flourish and tossed it to the slim, apple-cheeked sister with a peremptory gesture that sent Theodrin hurrying to a corner opposite Pheolaine. Pheolaine was distinctly subdued, but Theodrin's tilted eyes were very wide, as though she was permanently startled, and her lips seemed ready to gasp. Like Pheolaine, her proper place in the hierarchy of Aes Sedai demanded better employment, but neither was likely to receive it soon. Romanda's compelling gaze rested a moment on Swan, as if considering whether to send her to a corner as well, then brushed past Lelaine almost dismissively before settling on Egwene. It seems that young man has been talking with the sea folk, Mother. The yellow eyes and ears in Kyrian are most excited about it. Do you have any idea what might interest him in the Afa Anmir? Despite the title, Romanda hardly sounded as if she were addressing the Amerlin's seat, but then she never did. There was no doubt who that young man was. Every sister in the camp accepted that Rand was the dragon reborn, but anyone who heard them talk would have believed they were speaking of an unruly young lout, who might come to dinner drunk and throw up on the table. She can hardly know what's in the boy's head, Lelaine said before Egwene could open her mouth. Her smile was not at all warm this time. If an answer is to be found, Romanda, it will be in Camelin. The Asa Anmir there are not sequestered on a ship, and I seriously doubt that high-ranking seafolk came so far from the sea on different errands. I've never heard of them doing so for any reason. It may be they have an interest in him. They must know who he is by now. Romanda smiled back, and frost should have appeared on the tent walls. There's hardly need to state the obvious, Lelaine. The first question is how to find out. I was about to resolve that when you barged in, Romanda. The next time the mother encounters Elaine or Nynaeve in Tel Riod, she can pass on instructions. Marililla can discover what the Asa Anmir want, or maybe what the boy does when she reaches Camelin. A pity the girls didn't think to set a regular schedule, but we must work around that. Marililla can meet with a sitter in Tel Riod when she knows. Lelaine
I'll
made
be
a
right
small
back,
gesture.
everyone.
Plainly, she herself was the intended sitter. I thought Salidar might be a suitable place. Romanda snorted with amusement. Even in that, there was no warmth. Easier to instruct Marililla than to see she obeys, Lelaine. I expect she knows she faces sharp questions. This Bowl of the Winds should have been brought to us for study first. None of the sisters in Ebudar had much ability in cloud dancing, I believe. And you can see the result. All this hurly-burly and suddenness. I have a thought to call a question before the hall concerning everyone involved. Abruptly, the gray-haired woman's voice became smooth as butter. As I recall, you supported the choice of Marililla. With a jerk, Lelaine drew herself up. Her eyes flashed. I supported who the Grey put forward, Romanda, and no more, she said indignantly. How could I have imagined she would decide to use the bowl there, and to include sea folk wilders in the circle? How could she believe they know as much of working weather as Aes Sedai? Abruptly, her ire slipped. She was defending herself to her fiercest adversary in the hall, her only real adversary, and, no doubt worse in her view, she was agreeing with her about the sea folk. There was no question that she did agree, but giving the fact voice was another matter. Romanda let her cold smile deepen as Lelaine's face paled with fury. She straightened her bronze-colored skirts with meticulous care as Lelaine searched for a way to turn matters about. We will see how the hall stands, Lelaine, she said finally. Until the question is called, I think it best if Marililla does not meet with any of the sitters involved in her selection. Even a suggestion of collusion would be looked at askance. I'm sure you will agree I should be the one to speak with her. Lelaine's face paled differently. She was not afraid, not visibly, yet Egwene could almost see her counting who might stand for her or against. Collusion was almost as serious as a charge of treason, and required only the lesser consensus. Likely she could avoid that, but the arguments would be deep and acrimonious. Romanda's faction might even increase. That would cause untold problems, whether or not Egwene's own plans bore fruit. And there was nothing she could do to stop it, short of revealing what really had happened in Ebudar. As well ask them to let her accept the same offer Pheolain and Theodrin had. Egwene drew breath. At least she might be able to prevent the use of Salidar as a meeting place in Tel Riod. That was where she met Elaine and Nynaeve now. When she did, anyway. She had not in days. With sitters popping in and out of the world of dreams, finding anywhere you could be sure they would not appear was difficult. The next time I encounter Elaine or Nynaeve, I will pass on your instructions regarding Marililla. I can let you know when she's ready to meet you. Which would be never, once she was done with those instructions. The sitters' heads whipped around, and two sets of eyes stared at her. They had forgotten she was there. Struggling to keep her face smooth, she realized her foot was tapping irritably and stopped it. She had to go along with what they thought of her a while longer yet. A little while longer. At least she no longer felt nauseated, just angry. Into that moment of silence, Chesa came bustling with Egwene's midday meal on a cloth-covered tray. Dark-haired, plump, and pretty in her middle years, Chesa managed to convey a proper respect without cringing. Her curtsy was as simple as her dark gray dress, with just a touch of plain lace at the throat. "Forgive me for intruding, Mother," Aes Sedai. "I am sorry this is late, Mother, but Mary seems to have wandered off." She clicked her tongue in exasperation as she set the tray in front of Egwene. Wandering seemed very unlike the misnamed Mary. That dour woman was as disapproving of faults in herself as she was
Hell
of those
yeah.
in others. Romanda frowned,
Shit to the
but she
dip
said
definitely
nothing.
sound
After all,
tasty.
she could hardly show too much interest in one of Egwene's maids, especially when the woman was her spy, just as Selene was Lilaine's. Egwene avoided looking at Theodrin or Phaelane, both still standing dutifully in their corners like accepted, rather than Aes Sedai themselves. Chesa half opened her mouth, but closed it again, perhaps intimidated by the sitters. Egwene was relieved when she dipped another curtsy and left with a murmured, "By your leave, Mother." Chase's advice was always indirect enough for any sister when anyone else was present. But right then, the last thing Egwene wanted was even a circumspect reminder to eat while her food was hot. Lilane took up as if there had been no interruption. "The important thing," she said firmly, "is to learn what the Atha Anmier want, or what the boy does. Maybe he wants to be their king, too." Holding out her arms, she allowed Phaelane to restore her cloak, which the dark young woman did with care. "You will remember to let me know if you have any thoughts on it, Mother?" That was just barely a request. "I will think hard," Egwene told her, which was not to say she would share her thoughts. She wished she had a glimmer of the answer. That the Atha Anmier believed Rand was their prophesied
Right back.
paramour, she knew, though the Hall did not. But what he wanted from them, or them from him, she could not begin to imagine. According to Elaine, the sea folk with them had no clue, or said not. Egwene almost wished one of the handful of sisters who had come from the Atha Anmier was in the camp. Almost. One way or another, those windfinders were going to cause trouble. At a wave of Romanda's hand, Theodrin leaped forward with the sitter's cloak as though goosed. By Romanda's expression, Lilaine's recovery did not best please her. "You will remember to tell Marililla I wish to speak with her, Mother," she said, and that was not a request at all. For a brief moment, the two sitters stood staring at one another, Egwene forgotten again in their mutual animosity. They departed without a word to her, very nearly jostling for precedence before Romanda slipped out first, drawing Theodrin in her wake. Baring her teeth, Lilane practically pushed Phaelane from the tent ahead of her. Swan heaved a hearty sigh and made no attempt to hide her relief. "By your leave, Mother," Egwene muttered mockingly. "If you please, Mother, you may go, daughters." Letting out a long breath, she settled back in her chair, which promptly pitched her onto the carpets in a heap. She picked herself up slowly and jerked her skirts straight, put her stole to right. At least it had not happened in front of those two. "Go get something to eat, Swan, and bring it back. We've a long day yet." "Some falls hurt less than others," Swan said as if to herself before ducking outside. It was a good thing she went so quickly, or Egwene might have given her an earful. She returned soon, though, and they ate hard rolls and lentil stew laced with tough carrot and scraps of meat Egwene did not look at closely. There were only a few interruptions, intrusions where they fell silent and pretended to study reports. Chesa came to take away the tray, and later to replace the candles, a task she grumbled over, which was not like her. "Who'd expect Selene to go missing too?" she muttered, half to herself. "Off canoodling with the soldiers, I expect. That Halima's a bad influence." A skinny young fellow with a dripping nose renewed the already dead coals in the braziers. The Armerlin got more warmth than most, but that was not a great deal. And he stumbled over his own boots and gaped at Egwene in a manner quite gratifying after the two sitters. Shiriam appeared to ask whether Egwene had any further instructions of all things, and then seemed to want to stay. Perhaps the few secrets she knew made her nervous. Her eyes certainly darted uneasily. That was the lot, and Egwene was not sure whether it was because no one bothered the Amerlin without cause, or because everyone knew the real decisions were made in the hall. "I don't know about this report of soldiers moving south out of Kandor," Swan said as soon as the tent flap fell behind Shiriam. "There's just the one, and borderlanders seldom go far from the Blight, but every fool knows that, so it's hardly the kind of tale anyone would make up." She was not reading from a page now. Swan had managed to keep very tenuous control of the Amerlin's network of eyes and ears so far, and reports, rumors, and gossip flowed to her in steady streams, to be studied before she and Egwene decided what to pass on to the hall. Lyanna had her own network to add to the flow. Most of it was passed on. Some things the hall had to know, and there was no guarantee that the Ajahs would pass on what their own agents learned. But it all had to be sieved for what might be dangerous, or serve to divert attention from the real goal. Few of those streams carried anything good of late. Kyrian had produced any number of rumors of Aes Sedai allied with Rand, or worse, serving him. Yet at least those could be dismissed out of hand. The Wise Ones would not say much at all about Rand or anyone connected to him, but according to them, Myrana was awaiting his return, and certainly Sisters in the Sun Palace, where the Dragon Reborn kept his first throne, were more than seed enough to grow those tales. Others were not easily ignored, even when it was hard to know what to make of them. A printer in Ilion asserted that he had proof Rand had killed Matin Stepaneus with his own hands and destroyed the body with the One Power, while a laborer on the docks there claimed she had seen the former king carried, bound and gagged and rolled in a rug aboard a ship that had sailed in the night with the blessings of the captain of the port watch. The first was far more likely, but Egwene hoped none of the Ajah's agents had picked up the same tale. There were already too many black marks against Rand's name in the sisters' books. It went on like that. The Shan-Chan seemed to be taking a firm hold in Ebudar against very little resistance. That might have been expected in a land where the Queen's true rule ended a few days' ride from her capital, yet it was hardly heartening. The Shido seemed to be everywhere, though word of them always came from someone who had heard from someone who had heard. Most sisters seemed to believe the scattered Shido were Rand's work, despite the Wise One's denials, carried by Shiriam. No one wanted to probe the Wise One's supposed lies too closely, of course. There were 100 excuses, but no one was willing to meet them in Tel Aran Riod except the sisters sworn to Egwene.
This is actually my first live for the phone, so...
Anaya dryly called the encounters quite compact lessons in humility, and she did not seem at all amused.
My tablet,
There can't be that many Shido, Egwene muttered.
My GoPro.
No herbs had been added to the second batch of charcoal, which was dying down in faint embers, and her eyes ached from the smoke that hung thin in the air. Channeling to get rid of it would disperse the last warmth, too. Some of this must be bandits' work. After all, who could tell a village emptied by people fleeing brigands from one emptied by Shido? Especially at third hand, or fifth. There are certainly enough bandits around to account for some of it. Most calling themselves Dragonsworn, which was no help at all. She worked her shoulders to loosen a few of the knots in her muscles. Abruptly, she realized that Swan was staring at nothing so intently that she appeared ready to slip off of her stool. Swan, are you falling asleep?
Pretty good. I like
we may have worked most of the day, but it's still light out. There was light at the smoke hole, though it did appear to be fading. Swan blinked. I'm sorry. I've been thinking about something lately and trying to decide whether to share it with you. About the hall. The hall? Swan, if you know something about the hall... I don't know anything, Swan cut in. It's what I suspect. She clicked her tongue in annoyance. Not even suspect, really. At least I don't know what to suspect. But I see a pattern. Then you had best tell me about it, Egwene said. Swan had shown herself very skilled at detecting patterns where others saw only a jumble. Shifting on her stool, Swan leaned forward intently. It's this. Aside from Romanda and Moria, the sitters chosen in Salidar they're too young. Much had changed in Swan, but speaking of other sisters' ages clearly made her uncomfortable. Esmeralda is the oldest, and I'm sure she isn't much past
The only
70.
that sucks is
I can't be certain without going into the novice books in Tarvalin or her telling us, but I'm as sure as I can be. It isn't often the hall has held more than one sitter under
Starling, that's
100,
what I'm looking
and
into.
here we have 9. But Romanda and Moria
okay,
are
Danny,
new,
too, nice.
Egwene said gently,
The only that sucks
resting her
about,
elbows on the table.
doing live for
It
the
had been a
phone
long
is
day.
the way
And
the
neither
chat
is
pops
young.
up. It doesn't stay up.
Maybe we should be grateful the others are, or they might not have been willing to raise me. She
Which
could have
kinda
pointed
sucks.
out that
I'm not
Swan
sure there's
herself had been chosen
way to
Amerlin
get it
at
to
less than
stay
half
up.
Esmeralda's age, but the reminder would have been cruel. Maybe, Swan said stubbornly. Romanda was certain for the hall as soon as she showed up. I doubt there's a yellow would dare speak against her for a chair. And Moria, she doesn't cling to Lilane, but Lilane and Lirella probably thought she would. I don't know. Mark me, though. When a woman is raised
Yeah,
too
but I want to
young,
look
there's a
into
reason,
the mobile one. That
She
way
took a
we
deep
can
breath.
take it
including when I was.
fishing with us.
The pain
us
of
when we
loss
go.
flashed across her face. The loss of the Amerlin seat, certainly. Maybe
Could
of
you
all
get
the
places
losses
we
she
go
had suffered.
to?
It was gone
signal
almost
on her
as soon as
phone
it came. Egwene did not
ain't
think
very
she had ever
good.
known a woman as strong as Swan Sanche.
So
This
we really
time,
can't
there
do a
were
live
more than
stream.
enough sisters of proper age to choose from, and I can't see 5 Ajas deadlocking on all of them. There is a pattern, and I mean to pick it out. Egwene did not agree. Change hung in the air whether Swan wanted to see it or not. Elida had broken custom, come very close to breaking law in usurping Swan's place. Sisters had fled the tower and let the world know of it, and that last certainly had never happened before. Change. Older sisters were more likely to be tied to the old ways, but even some of them had to see that everything was shifting. Surely that was why younger women, more open to the new, had been chosen. Should she order Swan to stop wasting her time with this? Swan had enough else to do. Or would it be a kindness to let her continue? She wanted so deeply to prove that the change she saw was not really occurring at all. Before Egwene could make a decision, Romanda ducked into the tent and stood holding the tent flaps
This is all
open.
roach-free.
Long
At
shadows
least,
stretched across the snow
what I
outside.
have broken up.
Evening was coming fast. Romanda's face was as dark as those shadows. She fixed Swan with a stern gaze and snapped one word. Out! Egwene gave an infinitesimal nod, but Swan was already on her feet. She missed a step, then all but ran from the tent. Any sister who stood where Swan did was expected to obey any sister of Romanda's
That's just a
strength
little
and
bit.
power,
That's not all of it.
not just a sitter.
We got a shitload of it.
Throwing down the tent
Wish
flap,
I liked my
Romanda
brother did
embraced
for
the
me.
source.
At least
The glow
a
of
handle.
Saidar surrounded her, and she wove a ward against eavesdropping around the inside of the tent without so much as a pretense of asking Egwene's permission. You are a fool, she grated. How long did you think you could keep this a secret? Soldiers talk, child. Men always talk. Bryn will be lucky if the hall doesn't put his head on a pike. Egwene stood slowly, smoothing her skirt. She had been waiting for this, but she still needed to be
Get a
careful.
little butt to
The
it.
game was far from played out, and everything could still turn against her in a flash. She had to pretend innocence until she could afford to stop pretending. Must I remind you that rudeness to the Amerlin seat is a crime, daughter, she said instead. She had been pretending so long, and she was so close.
Yeah,
The
definitely
Amerlin
hard to
seat.
find.
Romanda strode across the carpets to within arm's reach of Egwene, and by her
I
glare,
wish
the
it was
thought
a
of
better
reaching
blade
more
than what
crossed
it
her
is,
mind.
but
You're an
can't
infant.
complain.
Your bottom still remembers the last switching it had as a novice. After that, you'll be lucky if the hall doesn't put you in a corner with a few play pretties. If you want to avoid that, you will listen to me and do as I tell you. Now, sit down. Egwene seethed inside, but she sat. It was too soon. With a sharp, satisfied nod, Romanda planted her fists on her hips. She stared down at Egwene like a stern aunt lecturing a misbehaving niece. A very stern aunt. Or a headsman with a toothache. This meeting with Pelevar and Arathel has to go forward now it's been arranged. They expect the Amerlin seat, and they will see her. You will attend with all the pomp and dignity your title deserves, and you will tell them I am to speak for you, after which you will hold your tongue. Getting them out of our way will require a firm hand and someone who knows what she's about. No doubt Lilane will be here any minute, trying to put herself forward, but you just remember the trouble she's in. I've spent the day speaking with other sitters, and it appears very likely that Marilala and Mirana's failures will be quite firmly attached to Lilane when the hall sits next. So if you have any hope of gaining the experience you'll need to grow into that stole, it lies with me. Do you understand me? I understand perfectly, Egwene said, in what she hoped was a meek voice. If she let Romanda speak in her place, there would no longer be any doubts. The hall and the whole world would know who held Egwene Alvear by the scruff of her neck. Romanda's eyes seemed to bore into her head before the woman gave a curt nod. I hope that you do. I intend to remove Elida from the Amerlin seat, and I won't see that ruined because a child thinks she knows enough to find her way across the street without her hand held. With a snort, she flung her cloak around her and flung herself out of the tent. The ward vanished as she did. Egwene sat and frowned at the tent's entrance. A child? Burn the woman. She was the Amerlin's seat. Whether they liked it or not, they had raised her, and they were going to have to live with it. Eventually. Snatching up the stone inkwell, she hurled it at the tent flap. Lilane dodged back, barely avoiding the splash. Temper, temper, she chided, coming on in. No more asking permission than Romanda had, she embraced the source and wove a ward to stop anyone overhearing what she had to say. Where Romanda had been in a fury, Lilane appeared pleased with herself, rubbing her gloved hands and smiling. I don't suppose I need tell you your little secret is out. Very bad of Lord Bryn, but I think he's too valuable to kill. A good thing for him, I do. Let me see. I suppose Romanda told you that there will be a meeting with Pelevar and Arathel, but you are to let her do all the talking. Am I right? Egwene stirred, but Lilane waved a hand at her. No need to answer. I know Romanda. Unfortunately for her, I learned about this before she did, and instead of running to you straight away, I've been polling the other sitters. Do you want to know what they think? Egwene balled her fists in her lap, where she hoped they would not be noticed. I expect you're going to tell me. You're in no position to take that tone with me, Lilane said sharply, but the next instant her smile returned. The hall is displeased with you. Very displeased. Whatever Romanda has threatened you with, and it's easy enough to imagine, I can deliver. Romanda, on the other hand, has upset a number of sitters with her bullying. So unless you want to find yourself with less authority than the little you have now, Romanda is going to be surprised tomorrow when you name me to speak for you. It's hard to believe Arathel and Pelevar were foolish enough to put a thing like this in motion, but they'll slink away with their tails between their legs once I'm done with them. How do I know you won't carry out those threats anyway? Egwene hoped her angry mutter sounded like sullenness. Light, but she was tired of this. Because I say I won't, Lilane snapped. Don't you know by now that you aren't really in charge of anything? The hall is, and that is between Romanda and me. In another 100 years, you may grow into the stole, but for now, sit quietly, fold your hands, and let someone who knows what she is about see to pulling Elida down. After Lilane left, Egwene once more sat staring. This time she was not letting anger boil. You may grow into the stole. Almost the same thing Romanda had said. Someone who knows what she is about. Was she deceiving herself? A child, ruining what a woman with experience could handle easily? Swan slipped into the tent and stood looking worried. Gareth Bryn just came to tell me the hall knows, she said dryly, under cover of asking about his shirts. Him and his bloody shirts. The meeting is set for tomorrow at a lake about 5 hours to the north. Pelevar and Arathel are already on the way. Aemlyn, too. That's a third strong house. That's more than Lilane or Romanda saw fit to tell me, Egwene said just as dryly. No. 100 years of being led by the hand, pushed by the scruff of her neck, or 50 years or 5, and she would be fit for nothing more. If she had to grow, she had to grow now. Oh, blood and bloody ashes, Swan groaned. I can't stand it. What did they say? How did it go? About as we expected. Egwene smiled with a wonder that touched her voice, too. Swan, they couldn't have handed me the hall better if I had told them what to do. The last light was failing as Shiriam approached her tiny tent, smaller even than Egwene's. If she had not been keeper, she would have had to share. Ducking inside, she had only time to realize she was not alone when she was shielded and flung face down on her cot. Stunned, she tried to cry out, but a corner of one of her blankets wadded itself into her mouth. Dress and shift burst away from her body like a pricked bubble. A hand stroked her head. You were supposed to keep me informed, Shiriam. That girl is up to something, and I want to know what. It took a long time to convince her questioner that she had already told all she knew, that she would never hold back a word, not a whisper. When she was left alone at last, it was to lie curled up and whimpering from her welts, bitterly wishing that she had never in her life spoken to a single sister in the hall. Chapter 17. Out on the Ice. The next morning, a column rode north from the Aes Sedai camp well before dawn, near silent except for the creak of saddles and the crunch of hooves breaking through the snow's crisp crust. Occasionally a horse snorted, or metal jingled and was quickly muffled. The moon was already down, the sky glistening with stars, but the pale blanket lying over everything below lightened the darkness. When the first glimmers of day appeared in the east, they'd been riding a good hour or more, which was not to say they had traveled far. Over some open stretches, Egwene could let Daishar go at a slow canter that sprayed white like splashing water, but for the most part the horses walked, and not quickly, through sparse forest, where the snow made deep drifts below and clung to branches overhead. Oak and pine, sour gum and leatherleaf, and trees she did not recognize all looked even more bedraggled than they had in the heat and drought. Today was the feast of Abram, but there would be no prizes baked in honey cakes. The lights and some people found surprises in the day, though. The sun rose and climbed, a pale golden ball that gave no warmth. Every breath still bit the throat and produced a puff of mist. A sharp wind blew, not hard, but cutting, and to the west, dark clouds rolled north on their way to Andor. She felt a touch of pity for whoever would know the burden of those clouds, and relief that they were heading away. Waiting another day would have been maddening. She had been unable to sleep at all, for fidgety restlessness, not headaches. Restlessness and tendrils of fear that had crept in like cold air under the edges of the tent. She was not tired, though. She felt like a compressed spring, a tight-wound clock, full of energy that wanted desperately to find release. Light, everything could still go horribly wrong.
I don't have my bifocals on.
It was an impressive column behind the standard of the White Tower, the white flame of Tar Valon centered on a spiral of 7 colors, one for each Aja. Sewn secretly in Salidar, it had lain in the bottom of a chest ever since, with the keys in the keeping of the hall. She did not think they would have produced it except for this morning's need for pomp. 1,000 heavy cavalry in plate and mail provided a close escort, a panoply of lances, swords, maces, and axes seldom seen south of the borderlands. Their commander was a one-eyed Shinaran with a vividly painted eye patch, a man she had met once, what seemed an age ago. Uno Nomesta glared at the trees through the steel bars of his helmet's face guard, as if he expected every last one to hide an ambush, and his men seemed nearly as watchful, erect in their saddles. Almost out of sight ahead through the trees rode a knot of men who wore helmets, breast and back plates, but no other armor. Their cloaks whipped about freely. A gauntleted hand for the reins and a hand for the short bow they each carried left nothing to grasp at warmth. There were more farther on, and beyond sight to left and right and behind, another 1,000 altogether to scout and screen. Gareth Bryn did not expect trickery from the Andorrans, but he had been wrong before, so he said, and the Mirandians were another matter. And then there was the possibility of assassins in Elida's pay, or even dark friends. The light alone knew when a dark friend might decide to kill, or why. For that matter, though the Shido were supposedly far away, no one ever seemed to know they were there until the killing began. Even bandits might have tried their hand with too small a party. Lord Bryn was not a man to take chances unnecessarily, and Egwene was very glad.
Finish this first.
Today she wanted as many witnesses as possible. She herself rode ahead of the banner with Shiriam and Swan and Bryn. The others appeared caught in their own thoughts. Lord Bryn sat his saddle easily, the mist of his even breath forming a light frost on his face guard, yet Egwene could see him calmly marking terrain in his mind, in case he had to fight over it. Swan rode so stiffly that she would be sore long before reaching their destination, but she stared north as though she could already see the lake, and sometimes she nodded to herself or shook her head. She would not have done that unless she was uneasy. Shiriam knew no more of what was to come than the sitters did, yet she appeared even more nervous than Swan, shifting constantly in her saddle and grimacing. Anger shone in her green eyes, too, for some reason. Close behind the banner came the entire hall of the tower in double column, wearing embroidered silks and rich velvets and furs and cloaks with the flame large on the back. Women who seldom wore more ornaments than the great serpent ring were decked today in the finest gems the camp's jewelry caskets could supply. Their warders made a more splendid display simply by wearing their color-shifting cloaks. Parts of the men seemed to vanish as the disquieting cloaks swirled in the stiff breeze. Servants followed, 2 or 3 for every sister, on the best horses that could be found for them. They might have passed for lesser nobility themselves, if a number had not been leading pack animals. Every chest in the camp had been ransacked to outfit them in bright colors. Perhaps because she was one of the sitters without a warder, Delana had brought Halima along on a spirited white mare. The two rode almost knee to knee. Sometimes Delana would lean toward Halima to speak privately, though Halima appeared too excited to listen. Supposedly, Halima was Delana's secretary, but everyone believed it a case of charity, or possibly friendship, however unlikely, between the dignified, pale-haired sister and the hot-natured, raven-haired countrywoman. Egwene had seen Halima's hand, and it had the unformed look of a child's just learning her letters. Today she was in garments as fine as any sister's, with gems that easily equaled Delana's, who must have been their source. Whenever a gust opened her velvet cloak, she displayed a shocking amount of bosom, and she always laughed and took her time about gathering it around her again, refusing to admit that she felt the cold any more than the sisters did. For once, Egwene was glad of all the gifts of clothing she had been given, allowing her to surpass the sitters. Her green and blue silk was slashed with white and worked with seed pearls. Pearls even decorated the backs of her gloves. At the last minute, a cloak lined with ermine had been provided by Romanda, and a necklace and earrings of emeralds and white opals by Lelaine. The moonstones in her hair came from Janya. The Amerlin had to be resplendent today. Even Swan appeared ready for a ball, in blue velvets and cream lace, with a wide band of pearls at her throat and more laced through her hair. Romanda and Lelaine led the sitters, riding so closely behind the soldier bearing the banner that he glanced over his shoulder nervously and sometimes edged his horse nearer the riders ahead of him. Egwene managed not to look back more than once or twice, yet she could feel their eyes pressing between her shoulder blades. Each thought her tied in a neat bundle, but each had to be wondering whose cords had done the binding. Oh, light, this could not go wrong. Not now. Other than the column, little moved in all that snow-covered landscape. A broad-winged hawk wheeled overhead against the cold blue sky for a time before winging eastward. Twice, Egwene saw black-tailed foxes trotting in the distance, still in their summer fur. And once a large deer with tall, forked antlers ghosted away and vanished amid the trees. A hare, starting up right under Bella's hooves and bounding off, made the shaggy mare toss her head, and Swan yelped and grabbed at the reins as if she expected Bella to bolt. Of course, Bella only gave a reproachful snort and plodded onward. Egwene's tall roan gelding shied more, and the hare had not gone near him. Swan began grumbling under her breath after the hare scampered away, and it took quite some time before she eased Bella's reins. Being on a horse always made her grumpy. She traveled in one of the wagons whenever possible, but she was seldom this bad. There was no need to look further than Lord Bryn, or her fierce glances at him, to know why. If he noticed Swan's looks, he gave no sign. The only one not in fine array, he looked as he always did, plain and slightly battered, a rock that had weathered storms and would outlast more to come. For some reason, Egwene was glad he had resisted their efforts to dress him in finer garb. They truly did need to make an impression, yet she thought he made an excellent one as he was. "It's a fine morning to be in the saddle," Shiriam said after a time. "Nothing like a good ride in the snow to clear the head." Her voice was not low, and she cut her eyes at the still muttering Swan with a tiny smile. Swan did not say anything. She hardly could do that in front of so many eyes, but she did give Shiriam a hard look that promised sharp words for later. The fire-haired woman twisted away abruptly with very close to a wince. Wing, her dappled gray mare, pranced a few steps, and Shiriam settled her down with almost too firm a hand. She had shown little gratitude to the woman who had named her mistress of novices, and like most in that position, she found reasons to blame Swan. It was the only flaw Egwene had found in her since the swearing. Well, she had protested that as keeper, she should not have to take orders from Swan the way the others who had sworn did, but Egwene had seen right away where that would lead. This was not the first time Shiriam had tried to plant a barb. Swan insisted on handling Shiriam herself, and her pride was too fragile for Egwene to deny the request unless matters got out of hand. Egwene wished there was some way to make more speed. Swan went back to her grumbling, and Shiriam was obviously thinking of something else to say that would not quite bring a rebuke. All that muttering and cutting of eyes began to find their way under Egwene's skin. After a while, even Bryn's level-headed poise began to wear. She found herself thinking of things she might say that would shake his aplomb. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, she did not believe anything could. But if she had to wait much longer, she thought she might burst from sheer impatience. The sun climbed toward midday, the painfully slow miles passed behind, and at last one of the riders ahead turned and raised his hand. With a hasty apology to Egwene, Bryn galloped forward. It was really more of a lumber through the snow for his sturdy bay gelding traveler, but he caught up to the outriders, exchanged a few words, then sent them on through the trees and waited for Egwene and the others to reach him. As he fell in beside her once more, Romonda and Lilane joined them. The two sitters barely acknowledged Egwene's presence, fixing Bryn with the cool serenity that had shaken so many men facing Aes Sedai. Except that now and then, each glanced sideways at the other in a considering way. They hardly seemed to realize what they were doing. Egwene hoped they were half as nervous as she. She would be satisfied with that. Coolly serene stares washed over Bryn like rain over that rock. He made slight bows to the sitters, but he spoke to Egwene. "They've already arrived, Mother." That had been expected. "They brought almost as many men as we did, but they're all on the north side of the lake. I've put scouts out to make sure nobody tries circling around, but in truth I don't expect it." "Let us hope you are right," Romonda told him sharply. And Lilane added in a much colder tone, "Your judgment has not been all it should be of late, Lord Bryn." A frigid, cutting tone. "As you say, Aes Sedai." He made another slight bow without really turning from Egwene. Like Swan, he was tied to her openly now, at least so far as the hall was concerned. If only they did not know how tightly. If only she could be sure
Hey,
how
John
tightly.
McDonald, how you doing?
One thing more, Mother, he went on.
Sorry I missed you.
Talmanis is there at the lake,
I'll
too.
be
There are about
right
100
back.
of the band
And
on
then
the
we'll
east
do a
side.
dab.
Not enough to cause trouble
See what I
even
mean
if he
about
wanted
missing
to,
chat?
and
It doesn't
small
show
chance
like it
he
should.
would, I think.
But I'll be right back.
Egwene merely nodded. Not enough to cause trouble? Talmanis alone might be enough. She tasted bile. It could not go wrong now. Talmanis! Lilane exclaimed, serenity shattering. She must have been as much on edge as Egwene. How did he find out? If you've included Dragonsworn in your scheming, Lord Bryn, you truly will learn what going too far means. Right on top of her, Ramonda growled, "This is disgraceful. You say you've only learned of his presence now? If that's so, your reputation is puffed up like a boil." Aes Sedai calm was a thin layer for some today, it seemed. They continued in that vein, but Bryn rode on, only murmuring the occasional, "As you say, Aes Sedai," when he had to say something. He had received worse in Egwene's hearing this morning and reacted no more. It was Swan who finally snorted, and then blushed crimson when the sitters looked at her in surprise. Egwene almost shook her head. Swan was very definitely in love, and she very definitely needed talking to. For some reason, Bryn smiled, but that might just have been because he was no longer the object of the sitters' attention. Trees gave way to another open space, larger than most, and there was no more time for frivolous thoughts. Aside from a wide rim of tall brown reeds and cattails poking through the snow, nothing named this a lake. It could have been a big meadow, flat and very roughly oval in shape. Some distance from the tree line on the frozen lake stood a large blue canopy on tall poles, with a small crowd of people milling about it and dozens of horses held by servants behind. The breeze ruffled a bright thicket of pennants and banners and carried muffled shouts that could only have been orders. More servants darted about hastily. Apparently, they had not been there long enough to finish their preparations. Perhaps a mile away, the trees began again, and the feeble sunlight glinted off metal there. Quite a lot of metal, stretching the length of the far shore. To the east, almost as close as the pavilion, the 100 men of the band
Just
made no
heating up.
effort at concealment,
Water
standing
turns
beside
green.
their mounts, just short of where the cattails began. A few of them pointed when the flag of Tarvalon appeared. The people at the pavilion stopped to look. Egwene did not pause before riding out onto the snow-covered ice. She did imagine herself a rosebud opening to the sun, though, that old novice exercise. She did not actually embrace Saidar, but the calm that came was very welcome. Swan and Shiriam followed, and the sitters with their warders and the servants. Lord Bryn and the bannerman were the only two soldiers who went. Shouts rising behind her told of Uno putting his armored horsemen into position along the shoreline. The more lightly armored men were arrayed to either side, those not off guarding against treachery. One reason the lake had been chosen was that the ice was thick enough to hold a fair number of horses, but not hundreds, much less thousands. That cut down on the chance of chicanery. Of course, a pavilion beyond bowshot was not beyond the range of the one power, not if it could be seen. Except that the worst man in the world knew himself safe from that unless he threatened a sister. Egwene exhaled sharply and began acquiring calm all over again. A proper greeting for the Amerlin seat should have had servants rushing forward with warm drinks and cloths wrapped around hot bricks, and the lords and ladies themselves to take reins and offer a kiss in token of Abram. Any visitor of rank at all would have had the servants, but no one stirred from the pavilion. Bryn himself dismounted and came to hold Daishar's bridle, and the same lanky young man who had come with fresh charcoal the day before ran to hold Egwene's stirrup. His nose still dripped, but in a red velvet coat only a little too large for him and a bright blue cloak, he outshone any of the nobles who stood staring from under the canopy. They appeared to be in stout woolens for the most part, with not much embroidery and very little silk or lace. Likely they had had to scramble to find suitable clothes once the snows began, and them already on the march. Though the simple truth was that the young man might have outshone a tinker. Carpets had been laid to floor the pavilion, and braziers lit, though the breeze carried away heat and smoke alike. Chairs stood in two facing lines for the delegations, 8 in each. They had not expected so many sisters. Some of the waiting nobles exchanged looks of consternation, and a number of their servants actually wrung their hands, wondering what to do. They need not have. The chairs were a mismatched miscellany, but they were all alike in size, and none was noticeably more worn or battered than another. None had noticeably more or less gilded carving. The lanky young man and a number of others trotted in, and under the frowns of the nobles, without so much as a by your leave, carried those meant for Aes Sedai out into the snow, then rushed to help with unloading the pack horses. Still, no one spoke a word. Quickly, seats were set up sufficient for the entire hall, and Egwene. Only simple benches, though polished till they gleamed, but each stood on a wide box covered with cloth in the color of the sitter's aja, in a long row as wide as the canopy. The box placed in front for Egwene's bench was striped like her stole. There had been a great flurry of activity in the night, beginning with finding beeswax for polish and good cloth of the right colors. When Egwene and the sitters took their places, they sat a foot higher than anyone else. She had had her doubts about that, but the lack of any word of welcome had settled those. The meanest farmer would have offered a cup and a kiss to a vagabond on a feast of Abram. They were not supplicants, and they were not equals. They were Aes Sedai. Warders stood behind their Aes Sedai, and Swan and Shiriam flanked Egwene. The sisters ostentatiously flung back cloaks and tucked gloves away to emphasize that the cold did not touch them, a sharp contrast to the nobles clutching their own cloaks close. Outside, the flame of Tar Valon lifted in the stiffening breeze. Only Halima, lounging beside Delana's chair on the edge of the gray-covered box, had all spoiled the grand image, and her big green eyes stared at the Andorans and the Mirandians so challengingly
I just gotta
she did not spoil it.
get this fixed.
There were a few stares when Egwene took the seat in front, but only a few. No one really looked surprised. I suppose they've heard all about the girl Amerlin, she thought dryly. Well, there had been queens younger, including queens of Andor and Mirandy. Calmly she nodded, and Shiriam gestured to the line of chairs. No matter who had arrived first or provided the pavilion, there was no doubt who had called this meeting, who was in charge. Her action was not well received, of course. There was a moment of silent hesitation while the nobles cast their minds about for some way to regain an equal footing, and no few grimaces as they realized it could not be done. Grim-faced, 8 of them sat down, 4 men and 4 women, with much angry gathering of cloaks and adjusting of skirts. Those of lesser rank stood behind the chairs, and clearly there was little love lost between Andoran and Mirandian. For that matter, the Mirandians, men and women alike, muttered and jostled one another for precedence as fiercely as they did their allies from the north. The Aes Sedai received a good many dark looks as well, and a few folk spared scowls for Bryn, who stood off to one on both sides of the border, and respected even by most of those who would have liked to see him dead. At least that had been the case before he turned up leading the Aes Sedai's army. He ignored their acid glares as he had the sitters' acid tongues. Another man did not join with either party. A pale man, less than a hand taller than Egwene, in a dark coat and breastplate. He wore the front of his head shaved, and there was a long red scarf tied around his left arm. His deep gray cloak had a large red hand worked on the breast. Talmanis stood opposite Bryn, leaning against one of the pavilion's poles with an arrogant casualness, and watched without revealing a hint of his thoughts. Egwene wished she knew what he was doing there. She wished she knew what he had said before she arrived. In any case, she had to speak with him. if it could be managed without 100 ears listening. A lean, withered man in a red cloak sitting in the middle of the row of chairs leaned forward and opened his mouth, but Shiriam forestalled him in a clear, carrying voice. Mother, may I present to you of Andor, Arathel Renshar, High Seat of House Renshar, Pelavar Koalan, High Seat of House Koalan, Aemlyn Karand, High Seat of House Karand, and her husband, Kulhan Karand. They acknowledged their names sourly with bare nods and no more. Pelavar was the lean man. He was losing his dark hair from the front. Shiriam went on without pause. It was a good thing Bryn had been able to supply the names of those who had been chosen to speak. May I present of Murundi, Donal do Morni a Lord Dane, Shan do Mihona Makansa, Piter do Firna Akon, Sigan do Avharin Arus. The Murandians seemed to feel the lack of titles even more than the Andorans. Donal, wearing more lace than most of the women, twisted his curled mustaches fiercely, and Piter appeared to be trying to yank his loose. Sigan pursed full lips and her dark eyes caught fire, while Sean, a stocky, graying woman, snorted quite loudly. Shiriam took no notice. You are beneath the eyes of the Watcher of the Seals. You are before the flame of Tarvalon. You may present your supplications to the Amerlin seat. Well, they did not like that. Not in the least. Egwene had thought them sour before, but now they looked stuffed full of green persimmons. Perhaps they had believed they could pretend she was not the Amerlin at all. They would learn. Of course, first she had to teach the hall. There are ancient ties between Andor and the White Tower, she said loudly and firmly. Sisters have always expected welcome in Andor or Murundi. Why then do you bring an army against Aes Sedai? You meddle where thrones and nations fear to step. Thrones have fallen, meddling in the affairs of Aes Sedai. That sounded suitably threatening, whether or not Mirella and the others had managed to prepare her way. With luck, they were well on their way back to the camp, with no one the wiser, unless one of these nobles spoke the wrong name. That would lose her an advantage against the hall, but alongside everything else, it was a straw beside a hayloft. Pelavar exchanged looks with the woman seated beside him, and she stood. Creases in her face could not disguise the fact that Arathel had been a beautiful, fine-boned woman when young. Now gray threaded thickly through her hair, and her gaze struck as hard as any warder's. Her red-gloved hands gripped the edges of her cloak at her sides, but plainly not in worry. Mouth compressed to a thin line, she scanned the line of sitters, and only then spoke. Past Egwene, to the sisters behind her. Gritting her teeth, Egwene put on an attentive expression. We are here precisely because we do not want to become entangled in the White Tower's affairs. Arathel's voice held tones of authority, unsurprising in the high seat of a powerful house. There was no hint of the diffidence that might have been expected, even from a powerful house facing so many sisters, not to mention the Amerlin seat. If all we've heard is true, then at best allowing you to pass through Andor unhindered may seem like giving aid or even alliance in the eyes of the White Tower. Failure to oppose you might mean learning what the Great learns in the wine press. Several of the Murandians turned their scowls on her. No one in Murundi had tried to hinder the sisters' passage. Very likely, no one had considered the possibilities beyond the day they passed on to another's lands. Arathel continued as if she had not noticed, but Egwene doubted that. At worst, we have heard reports of Aes Sedai making their way into Andor in secret, and tower guards. Rumors might be a better word, but they come from many places. None of us would like to see a battle between Aes Sedai in Andor. The light preserve and protect us, Donal burst out, red-faced. Piter nodded encouragement, sliding to the edge of his seat, and Sean looked ready to jump in herself. No one wants to see it here either, Donal spat. Not between Aes Sedai. For sure we've heard what happened out east. And those sisters... Egwene breathed a little more easily when Arathel stepped on him firmly. If you please, Lord Donal, you will have your turn to speak. She turned back to Egwene, to the sitters once more, really, without waiting on his reply, leaving him spluttering and the other 3 Murandians glowering. She herself looked quite undisturbed, simply a woman laying out the facts. Laying them out, and meaning that they should be seen as she saw them. As I was saying, that is the worst we fear, if the tales are true, and also if they are not. Aes Sedai may be gathering secretly in Andor with tower guards. Aes Sedai with an army are ready to enter Andor. Often enough the White Tower has seemed to aim at one target only for the rest of us to learn later it was aiming at another all along. I can hardly imagine even the White Tower going this far, but if ever there was a target you might twist yourselves into a knot for, it's the Black Tower. Arathel shivered slightly, and Egwene did not think it was the cold. A battle between Aes Sedai might ruin the land for miles around. That battle might ruin half of Andor. Pelivar sprang to his feet. The plain of it is, you must go another way. His voice was surprisingly high, but no less firm than Arathel's. If I must die to defend my lands and my people, then better here than where my lands and people die too. He subsided at Arathel's soothing gesture, sinking back into his chair. Hard-eyed, he did not look mollified. Aemlyn, a plump woman wrapped in dark wool, nodded agreement with him, as did her square-faced husband. Donal stared at Pelivar as though he had never had this thought either, and he was not the only one. Some of the standing Murandians began to argue out loud until others quieted them, sometimes with a shaken fist. Whatever had possessed these people to join forces with the Andorans? Egwene drew breath. A rosebud opening to the sun. They had not acknowledged her as the Amerlin seat. Arathel had come as close to ignoring her as was possible without pushing her aside. Yet they had given her everything else she could have wished for. Calm. Now was when Lelaine and Romanda would be expecting her to name one of them to handle the negotiations. She hoped their stomachs were tied in knots with wondering which of them it would be. There would be no negotiations.
Lose my light.
There could be
I'm
none.
using a
Elida, she said levelly,
little flashlight
eyeing
for my
Arathel
light.
and the seated
Since
nobles
I'm
in
streaming on
turn,
my phone. This
is a usurper who has violated
as
what
it gets
lies
right
at the
there.
very heart of the White Tower. I am the Amerlin seat. She was surprised at how stately she managed to sound, how cool, but not as surprised as she once would have been. The light helper, she was the Amerlin seat. We go to Tar Valon to remove Elida and try her, but that is the White Tower's business and none of yours except to know the truth. This so-called Black Tower also is our business. Men who can channel have always been the White Tower's affair. We will deal with them as we choose when the time is ripe, but I assure you that time is not now. More important matters must take precedence. She heard movements among the sitters behind her, an actual shifting on benches, and the crisp swishing of divided skirts being adjusted. At least some must be severely agitated. Well, several had suggested that the Black Tower might be dealt with in passing. Not one believed there could be more than a dozen or so men there at most, no matter what they heard. After all, it simply was not possible that hundreds of men would want to channel. Then again, it might have been the realization that Egwene was not going to name either Romanda
I'll be
or
right back.
Lelaine. Arathel frowned, perhaps catching a hint of something in the air. Pelivar moved on the point of rising again, and Donal drew himself up querulously. There was nothing for it but to press on. There never had been. I understand your concerns, she continued in the same formal tone, and I will address them. What was that strange call to arms the band used? Yes, it was time to toss the dice. I give you this assurance as the Amerlin seat. For 1 month we will stay here, resting, and then we will leave Murandy, but we will not cross the border into Andor. Murandy will be troubled by us no more after that. and Andor will not be troubled at all. I'm certain, she added, the Murandian lords and ladies here will be happy to supply our wants in exchange for good silver. We will pay fair prices. There was no point mollifying the Andorans if it meant Murandians raiding the horses and supply trains. The Murandians, looking around uneasily, appeared decidedly torn in any case. There was coin to be made, and a great deal of it supplying an army so large. But on the other hand, who could haggle successfully with whatever an army so large offered? Donal actually seemed ready to sick up, while Sian seemed to be doing sums in her head. Mutters rose among the onlookers, more than mutters, nearly loud enough for Egwene. She wanted to look over her shoulder. The silence from the sitters was deafening. Swan was staring straight ahead and gripping her skirts as if to keep herself looking forward by main force. At least she had known what was coming. Shiriam, who had not, eyed the Andorans and Murandians regally, calmly, as though she had expected every word. Egwene needed to make them forget the girl they saw before them, and hear a woman with the reins of power firmly in hand. If they were not in her hands now, they would be. She firmed her voice. Mark me well. I have made my decision. It is for you to accept it, or face what surely will come from your failure. As she fell silent, the wind gusted to a brief howl, rattling the canopy, tugging at garments. Egwene straightened her hair calmly. Some of the watching nobles shivered and twitched their cloaks around them, and she hoped their shivers came from more than the weather. Arethel exchanged looks with Pelavar and Aemlyn, and all three studied the sitters before slowly nodding. They believed she was merely mouthing words the sitters had put on her tongue. Even so, Egwene very nearly sighed with relief. It will be as you say, the hard-eyed noblewoman said. Again to the sitters. We do not doubt the word of Aes Sedai, of course, but you will understand if we also remain. Sometimes what you hear isn't what you think you heard. Not that that's the case here, I'm sure, but we will stay while you do. Donal truly looked ready to empty himself. Very likely his lands lay nearby. Andoran armies in Murandy had seldom been known to pay for anything. Egwene stood, and she could hear the rustle of the sitters rising behind her. It is agreed, then. We must all depart soon, if we are to return to our own beds before dark, but we should spare a few moments. Getting to know one another a little better now might avoid misunderstandings later. And talk might give her a chance to reach Talmanis. Oh, one other thing you should all be aware of. The novice book is now open to any woman, whatever her age, if she tests true. Arethel blinked. Swan did not, yet Egwene thought she heard a faint grunt. This was not part of what they had discussed, but there would never be a better time. Come, I'm sure you would all like to speak with the sitters. Let formality go. Without waiting for Shiriam to offer a hand, she stepped down. She almost felt like laughing. Last night she had been afraid she might never reach her goal, but she was halfway there, almost halfway, and it had not been nearly as difficult as she had feared. Of course, the other half remained. Chapter 18. A Peculiar Calling. For a moment after Egwene descended, no one else moved, and then the Andorans and Murandians headed for the sitters, almost as one. Apparently a girl Amerlin, a girl puppet and figurehead, held no interest, not with ageless faces in front of them that at least said they actually were speaking to Aes Sedai. 2 or 3 lords and ladies clustered around each sitter, some thrusting their chins demandingly, others diffidently bending their necks, yet every one insistent on being heard. The sharp breeze whisked away the mist of their breath and fluttered cloaks forgotten in the importance of asking their questions. Shiriam was buttonholed, too, by red-faced Lord Donal, who blustered and jerked bows by turns. Egwene pulled Shiriam away from the narrow-eyed man. Find out discreetly all you can about these sisters and tower guards in Andor, she whispered hastily. As soon as she released the woman, Donal reclaimed her. Shiriam actually looked put upon, but her frown disappeared quickly. Donal blinked uneasily as she began questioning him. Romanda and Lilane gazed at Egwene through the crowd with faces carved from ice, but each had acquired a pair of nobles who wanted something. Reassurance that there was no hidden trick in Egwene's words, perhaps. How they would hate doing that, but dodge and duck as they would, and they would. There was no way to really avoid that reassurance without repudiating her on the spot. Even those two would not go that far. Not here. Not publicly. Swan slipped close to Egwene, features set in meekness, except that her eyes darted, maybe looking for Ramonda or
cheers,
Lilane
everyone.
coming to seize them where they stood, and forget law, custom, propriety, and who was watching. "Shine, Chunla," she all but hissed in a whisper. Egwene nodded, but her eyes searched for Talmanis. Most of the men and some of the women were tall enough to hide him. With everyone shifting about, she went up on her toes. Where had he gone to? Seagun planted herself in front of her, fists on her hips, eyeing Swan doubtfully. Egwene let her heels down hurriedly. The Amerlin could not bob about like a girl at a dance looking for a boy. A rosebud unfolding, calm, serenity, drat all men. A slender woman with long, dark hair, Seagun seemed to have been born petulant, her full mouth fixed in a pout. Her dress was good blue wool and made for warmth, but it had far too much vivid green embroidery across her bosom, and her gloves were bright enough for a tinker. She looked Egwene up and down, pursing her lips, with as much incredulity on her face as she had given Swan. "What you said about the novice book," she said abruptly. "Were you meaning any woman of any age at all? Any can become Aes Sedai, then?" A question close to Egwene's heart, and an answer she dearly wanted to give, along with a box on the ear for the doubt. But just then a small gap in the flow of people showed her Talmanis near the back of the pavilion, talking with Pelavar. They stood stiffly, mastiffs not quite ready to show teeth, yet they were keeping a watch to make sure no one came close enough to overhear what they had to say. "Any woman of any age at all, daughter," she agreed absently. "Pelavar?" "Thank you," Seagun said, and haltingly added, "Mother." She sketched a curtsy, the barest hint of one, before hurrying off. Egwene stared after her. Well, it was a beginning. Swan snorted. "I don't mind sailing the fingers of the dragon in the dark if I must," she muttered half under her breath. "We discussed that. We weighed the dangers, and anyway, there doesn't seem to be a gull's last dinner for choice. But you have to set a fire on deck just to make things interesting. Netting lionfish isn't enough for you. You have to stuff a prickleback down your dress, too. You aren't content trying to wade a school of silver pike." Egwene broke in. "Swan, I think I should tell Lord Bryn you're head over heels in love with him. It's only fair that he know, don't you agree?" Swan's blue eyes bulged, and her mouth worked, but all that came out was a sort of gobbling. Egwene patted her shoulder. "Your Aes Sedai, Swan. Try to maintain at least a little dignity. And try to find out about those sisters in Andor." The crowd parted again. She saw Talmanis in a different place, but still on the edge of the pavilion, and alone now.
Layouts using to swear
Trying
out.
not to hurry, she walked in his direction, leaving Swan still gobbling. A pretty black-haired serving man whose bulky woolen breeches could
Right.
not quite hide neatly turned calves offered Swan a steaming silver cup from a tray. Other servants were moving about with other silver trays. Refreshment was being offered, if a bit late. It was much too late for the kiss of peace. She did not hear what Swan said as she snatched a cup, but from the way the fellow jerked and started bobbing bows, he had received sharp shards of her temper at the least. Egwene sighed. Talmanis stood with arms folded, observing the goings-on with an amused smile that did not reach his eyes. He seemed poised to explode into motion, but his eyes were tired. At her approach, he made a respectful leg, but there was a wry touch to his voice when he said, "You changed a border today." He gathered his cloak against the icy breeze. "It has always been fluid between Andor and Murundi, no matter what maps say. But Andor has never come south in such numbers before." Except for the Aiel War and the White Cloak War anyway, but they were only passing through then. Once they have been here a month, new maps will show a new line. Look at the Mirandians scramble, fawning over Pelavar and his companions as much as they do the sisters. They are hoping to make new friends for the new day. To Egwene, trying to conceal her careful watch on those who might be watching her, it seemed that all of the nobles, Mirandian and Andoran, were intent on the sitters, crowding around them. In any case, she had slightly more important matters in mind than borders, to her, if not to the nobles. Except for brief moments, none of the sitters were visible beyond the tops of their heads. Only Halima and Swan seemed to notice her, and a babble like that of a flock of excited geese filled the air. She lowered her voice and chose her words carefully. Friends are always important, Talmanis. You've been a good friend to Matt, and I think to me. I hope that hasn't changed. I hope you've not told anyone what you shouldn't. Light, she was anxious, or she would not have been so direct. Next, she would come right out and ask what he and Pelavar had been talking about. Luckily, he did not laugh at her for a blunt-tongued village woman, though he might have been thinking it. He studied her seriously before speaking. In a soft voice, he also knew caution. Not all men gossip. Tell me, when you sent Matt south, did you know what you would do here today? How could I know that 2 months ago? No, Aes Sedai aren't omniscient, Talmanis. She had hoped for something that would put her in the place she was, had planned for it, but she had not known, not back then. She also hoped he did not gossip. Some men did not. Romanda started toward her with a firm stride and a frozen face, but Arathel intercepted her, catching the yellow sitter's arm and refusing to be put off, despite Romanda's astonishment. Will you at least tell me where Matt is? Talmanis asked. On his way to Caemlyn with the daughter heir? Why are you surprised? A serving woman will speak to a soldier when fetching water from the same stream, even when he is a horrible dragon sworn, he added dryly. Light. Men really were inconvenient at times. The best of them found ways to say exactly the wrong thing at the wrong moment, to ask the wrong question, not to mention inveigling serving women into prattle. So much easier if she could just lie, but he had given her plenty of room within the oaths. Half the truth would suffice and keep him from herring off to Ebu Dar, maybe less than half. Over in the far corner of the pavilion, Swan stood conversing with a tall young redhead with curled mustaches who was eyeing her as dubiously as Segan had. Nobles usually knew the look of Aes Sedai, but he held only a part of Swan's attention. Her gaze constantly flickered toward Egwene. It seemed to shout, loud as conscience, easier, expedient, what it was to be Aes Sedai. She had not known about today, only hoped. Egwene expelled an irritated breath. Burn the woman. He was in Ebu Dar, the last I heard, she muttered. But he must be hurrying north as fast as he can by now. He still thinks he has to save me, Talmanis, and Matrim Cawthon wouldn't miss the chance to be on the spot so he can say I told you so. Talmanis did not look at all surprised. I thought it might be so, he sighed. I have felt something for weeks now. Others in the band have too. Not urgent, but always there. As if he needed me. As if I should look south, anyway. It can be peculiar, following a Taviran. I suppose it can, she agreed, hoping none of her incredulity showed. It was strange enough to think of Matt the Wastrel as leader of the Band of the Red Hand, much less as Taviran. But surely a Taviran had to be present nearby at least to have any effect. Matt was wrong about you needing rescue. You never had any intention of coming to me for help, did you? He still spoke softly, but she looked around hurriedly anyway. Swan was still watching them, and so was Halima. Piter stood much too close to her, puffing and preening and stroking his mustaches. From the way he stared down her dress, he had not mistaken her for a sister, that was certain. But she was giving him only half her mind, darting sidelong glances in Egwene's direction while she smiled up at him warmly. Everyone else appeared occupied, and no one stood close enough to hear. The Amerlin seat could hardly go running for sanctuary, now could she? But there have been times it's been a comfort knowing you were there, she admitted, reluctantly. The Amerlin seat was hardly supposed to need a bolt hole, but it
I'll
could
be
do no
right back.
harm so long as none of the sitters knew. You have been a friend, Talmanis. I hope that continues. I truly do. You have been more open with me than I expected, he said slowly. So I will tell you something. His face did not change. To any watcher, he must have seemed as casual as before, but his voice dropped to a whisper. I have had approaches from King Roedran about the band. It seems he has hopes of being Murandy's first real king. He wants to hire us. I would not have considered it normally, but there is never enough coin, and with this feel of Matt needing us, it might be better if we remain in Murandy. Clear as good glass, you are where you want to be and have everything in hand. He fell silent as a young serving woman curtsied to offer mulled wine. She wore finely embroidered green wool and a cloak plush with spotted rabbit. Other servants from the camp were helping out now as well, no doubt for something to do besides stand and shiver. The young woman's round face was decidedly pinched from the cold. Talmanis waved her off and pulled his cloak back around him, but Egwene took a silver cup to gain a moment for thought. Truly, there was little need for the band any longer. Despite all the muttering, the sisters took their presence as a matter of course now, dragon-sworn or not. They no longer feared an attack, and there had been no real need to use the band's presence to prod them into moving since leaving Salidar. The only true purpose Shen and Kalhar served now was to draw recruits into Bryn's army, men who thought two armies meant a battle and wanted to be on the side with the greatest numbers. She had no need of them, but Talmanis had acted as a friend, and she was Amerlin. Sometimes friendship and responsibility pushed in the same direction. As the serving woman moved off, Egwene laid a hand on Talmanis's arm. You must not do that. Even the band can't conquer all of Murandy by itself, and every hand will be against you. You know very well the one thing that makes Murandians stand together as foreigners on their soil. Follow us to Tar Valon, Talmanis. Matt will come there, I have no doubt of that. Matt would not really believe she was the Amerlin until he saw her wearing the stole in the White Tower. Roedran is no fool, he said placidly. All he wants us to do is sit and wait. A foreign army without Aes Sedai, and nobody knowing what it is up to. He should not have much trouble uniting the nobles against us. Then, so he says, we quietly slip across the border. He thinks he can hold on to them afterward. She could not stop a touch of heat entering her voice. And what is to stop him betraying you? If the threat goes away without a fight, his dream of a united Murandy might too. The fool man seemed amused. I'm not a fool either. Roedran cannot be ready before spring. This lot would never have stirred from their manners if the Andorrans had not come south, and they were on the march before the snows began. Before then, Matt will find us. If he is coming north, he must hear of us. Roedran will have to be satisfied with whatever he has managed by then. So if Matt does intend to go to Tar Valon, I may see you there yet. Egwene made a vexed sound. It was a remarkable plan, the sort of thing Swan might devise, and hardly a scheme she thought Roedran Almaric do Araloa a Naloi could carry off. The fellow was said to be so dissolute he made Matt look wholesome. But then it was hardly a scheme she would have believed Roedran could think up. The only certainty was that Talmanis had made up his mind. I want your word, Talmanis, that you won't let Roedran pull you into a war. Responsibility. The narrow stole around her neck seemed to weigh 10 times more than her cloak. If he moves sooner than you think, you will leave whether or not Matt has joined you. I wish I could promise, but it is not possible, he protested. I expect the first raid against my foragers 3 days at most after I start moving away from Lord Bryn's army. Every lordling and farmer will think he can pick up a few horses in the night, give me a pinprick, and run off to hide. I'm not talking about defending yourself, and you know it, she said firmly. Your word, Talmanis, or I will not allow your agreement with Roedran. The only way to stop it was to betray it, but she would not leave a war in her wake, a war she had started by bringing Talmanis here. Staring at her as if for the first time, he finally bent his head. Strangely, that seemed more formal than his bow had. "It will be as you say, Mother. Tell me, are you sure you are not Taviran too?" "I am the Amerlin seat," she replied. "That is quite enough for anyone." She touched his arm again. "The light shine on you, Talman." His smile nearly touched his eyes this time. Inevitably, despite their whispers, their talk had been noticed, maybe because of their whispers. The girl who claimed to be Amerlin, a rebel against the White Tower, in conversation with the leader of 10,000 Dragonsworn. Had she made Talmanis' scheme with Roadran harder or easier? Was war in Murundi less likely or more? Swan and her bloody law of unintended consequences. 50 gazes followed her, then darted away as she moved through the crowd, warming her fingers on her cup. Well, most darted away. The sitters' faces were all ageless Aes Sedai serenity, but Lelaine might have been a brown-eyed crow watching a fish struggle in the shallows, while Romanda's slightly darker eyes could have drilled holes through iron. Trying to keep a watch on the sun outside, she made a slow circuit through the pavilion. The nobles were still importuning sitters, but they moved from one to another as if seeking better answers, and she began to notice small things. Donal paused on his way from Janya to Moria, bowing low to Aemlyn, who acknowledged him with a gracious nod. Sean, turning away from Takima, curtsied deeply to Pelavar and received a slight bow in return. There were others, always a Murandian deferring to an Andoran, who responded just as formally. The Andorans tried to ignore Bryn except for the odd scowl, but any number of Murandians sought him out, one by one and well away from everyone else, and from the directions their eyes went, it was plain they were discussing Pelavar, or Arethel, or Aemlyn. Perhaps Talmanis had been right. She received bows and curtsies too, though none so deep as those given Arethel and Pelavar and Aemlyn, much less the sitters. Half a dozen women told her how thankful they were that matters had been resolved peacefully, though in truth almost as many made non-committal noises or shrugged uneasily when she expressed the same sentiment, as though they were uncertain it all would end peacefully. Her assurances that it would were met with a fervent, "The light send it so," or a resigned, "If the light wills." 4 called her mother, one without hesitating first. 3 others said that she was quite lovely, that she had beautiful eyes, and that she had a graceful carriage, in that order. Suitable compliments perhaps for Egwene's age, but not her station. At least she found one unalloyed pleasure. Segan was not alone in being intrigued by her announcement concerning the novice book. Plainly, that was why most of the women spoke to her in the first place. After all, the other sisters might be in rebellion against the tower, but she claimed to be the Amerlin seat. Their interest had to be strong to overcome that, though no one wanted to let it show. Arethel made the inquiry with a frown that put more creases in her cheeks. Aemlyn shook her graying head at the answer. Blocky Shan asked, followed by a sharp-faced Andoran lady named Nagara, then a pretty big-eyed Murandian called Jennet, and others. None wanted to know for herself. Several made that clear quickly, especially the younger women, but before long every single noblewoman there had asked, and several servants as well, under cover of offering more spiced wine. One, a wiry woman named Nildra, had come from the Aes Sedai camp. Egwene felt quite pleased with the seed she had planted there. She was not so pleased with the men. A few spoke to her, but only when they came face to face and seemed to have no other choice. A murmured word about the weather, either praising the end of the drought or deploring the sudden snows. A muttered hope that the bandit problem would end soon, perhaps with a significant look toward Talmanis, and they slipped away like greased pigs. A bear of an Andoran by the name of Makaran tripped over his own boots to avoid her. In a way, it was hardly surprising. The women had the justification, if only to themselves, of the novice book, but the men had only the thought that being seen conversing with her might tar them with the same brush.
Hell yeah.
It was really quite discouraging.
That was my last
She did not
trip,
care what the men thought
I got
about
a
novices,
boat
but she
somewhere
very
loaded.
much wanted to know if they were as fearful as the women that this would come to blows in the end. Fears like that could fulfill themselves very easily. At last, she decided there was only one way to find out. Pelavar turned from taking a fresh cup of wine from a tray and started back with a muffled oath to keep from bumping into her. Had she stood any closer, she would have had to stand on his boots.
Hell yeah.
Hot wine splashed over his gloved hand and ran down under his coat sleeve, producing a curse not so
It's a
muted.
fresh bowl.
Tall enough
somewhat
to
a fresh
loom
bowl,
over her, he
somewhat-
made a good
somewhat
job of
not.
it.
It's roach
His
meat.
scowl belonged on a man wanting
So
to
it's a
send
fresh
an
bowl,
annoying young
loaded,
woman
but
briskly
not
out of his
fresh
way,
meat.
or on a man who had nearly stepped on a red adder. She held herself erect and focused on an image of him as a small boy up to no good. That always helped. Most men seemed to feel it. He muttered something, it might have been a polite greeting or another oath, and dipped his head slightly, then tried to step around her. She
Right.
sidestepped to stay in front of him. He
It does
moved
its
back
trick,
and she
yeah.
followed. He began to look
I
hunted.
like roach
She
meat at
decided
night
to try
begin
putting him at
with, just
ease
'cause,
before pressing the important question.
hey, it
She
helps
wanted
me sleep.
answers, not more mumbling.
Roach meat has that.
You must be pleased to hear
high
that the daughter
indica
heir
level,
is on
so
her
it
way to
definitely,
Canelan, Lord Pelavar.
help you
She'd
relax
heard
and let
several
you
of
go
the
to sleep.
sitters mention that. His face went blank. Elaine Trakand has a right to put in her claim to the Lion Throne, he replied in a flat voice. Egwene's eyes widened, and he stepped back again, uncertainly. Perhaps he thought her
Yeah,
angry
it's
over
a-
the
it's a
absence of her
series.
title,
It's a
but she
pretty good
barely
series.
noticed that. Pelavar had supported Elaine's mother in her claim for the throne,
So
and
this is
Elaine
the
had been
roaches I
sure he
have.
would support her, too. She spoke of Pelavar fondly,
All the
like a
roach meat
favorite
anyways.
uncle. Mother, Swan murmured at her elbow, we must leave if you want to be sure of reaching the camp
'Cause I
before
think this
sunset.
one is.
She managed to put considerable urgency into those quiet words. The sun had passed its peak.
This one is book 8.
This is no weather to be in the open at nightfall, Pelavar said hurriedly. If you will excuse me, I must make ready to leave. Shoving his cup onto the tray of a passing servant, he hesitated before halfway making a leg and stalked off with the air of a man who had wriggled free of a trap. Egwene wanted to grind her teeth with frustration. What did the men think of their agreement? If it could be called that, the way she had forced it on them. Arathel and Aemlyn had more power and influence than most of the men, yet it was Pelavar and Kulhan and the like who rode with the soldiers. They could still make this flare up in her face like a barrel of lamp oil. Find Shiriam, she growled, and tell her to get everyone mounted now, no matter what it takes. She could not give the sitters a night to think about what had happened today, to plan and plot. They had to be back in camp before the sun went down. Chapter 19. The Law. Getting the sitters to their mounts proved no bother. They were as eager to be away as Egwene, especially Romanda and Lilane, face cold as the wind and with eyes like thunderclouds. The rest were the very image of cool-eyed Aes Sedai serenity, giving off composure like a heavy scent, yet they glided to their horses.
Alright, everyone. I'm gonna call into this stream for tonight. I gotta get up somewhat early tomorrow. Go fishing with the most hated grower. But I want to thank everyone stopping by and everyone who keeps coming by. Definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.